started as a development economist. I worked in rural development and very quickly realized that natural resources and our ecological infrastructure was as important to development, whether you're a poor person or a rich person for that matter, as the built-up infrastructure. Right? We always talk about infrastructure as roads, bridges, buildings, everything else. Forests, wetlands, ecosystems, the Arctic, the Antarctic, they're all part of an ecological infrastructure that we need to understand in the same way as being part of a system that sustains us, that we need to invest in, that we need to manage, that we need to maintain. And that was sort of the journey of then working in the environmental field and trying to understand how would one, first of all, through knowledge. And I do believe that we are in an age where knowledge and science has overtaken ideology as a driver for action. And this is not arguing that we live beyond history or ideology is not important, but people at the end of the day have not changed in terms of their basic instincts. If you can show them that a certain avenue is going to take them down up the garden path, I would say in English, they're not going to continue going down that path. They're going to look for other avenues. And I think the power that we have experienced, particularly on the environmental front in the last 30 to 40 years, with modern science, with more connected scientific research and systems research, earth systems research, earth sciences, is an immensely empowering experience that we begin to understand how action in one context affects another. In social sciences and social theory, that emerged much earlier. In the environmental natural resources field, it was only the second half of the 20th century when you saw that emerge and drive our thinking, which also meant you empowered people. I mean, the fact that there was something happening out there which we could not explain suddenly became explainable and therefore also actionable in reversing it. And one example that is a phenomenal success story is the Montreal Protocol, on ozone-depleting substances. It took us less than 20 years to agree that we had the science right, we had technology options, we would put a financial partnership in place, and next year we're going to declare essentially the world free of the major ozone-depleting substances. Now we have some other problems that have come since, but this was a phenomenal example of international partnership. And just last week, I think it was Timor-Leste, the last country on earth signed up in this treaty, which means it's the first real environmental governance treaty that has universal participation. And it was a technology partnership, a financing partnership, and all of that put together. How do you now bring into this cynical international context a faith that we should actually continue to work under a multilateral framework that has proven, sometimes extremely successful, but more often, and particularly recently, almost paralyzed in the face of this, that you move on this? And I moved from outside the United Nations into the UN 3 years ago out of the conviction that unless we can get the discourse amongst governments changed, we are stuck. And I've worked in the environment development field for 20 odd years now. There is an absolute ceiling there. If you cannot solve the way that nation states relate to each other and are able to cooperate with each other, you can put as much science out there as you want and NGOs and so on. We still live in a world where national sovereignty and nation states are the defining authority, nowhere more so than the United States for that matter. And I think one of the things that the United Nations can do, and that is particularly for the United Nations Environment Programme important, is create space for science. If you look at climate change, despite all the attempts by the Bush administration and by many others for purely national or domestic reasons to prevent science from becoming the accepted frame of reference, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, created a space where beyond national interest, science was able to articulate itself beyond control of any individual nation and become the reference point for a world to deal with climate change. So that safe space, I think, is still vitally important. It doesn't matter that it was US scientists or Chinese scientists that were there, but they were under the IPCC mode, not under the EPA or the State Department or the White House mode or the Chinese president's instructions. And that community of scientists was able to create a reference point that societies picked up in 2007 when the report came out. The other part is that in the UN you you have to create an understanding for multiple realities. And when you did the interview, I sort of referred a little bit to the fact that we all come from different backgrounds, and for example, the World Commission on Dams, when we took the commissioners, these 12 individuals, real life leaders, not wise old men who had retired, but real leaders from the NGO community, from the industry, and we stood in front of a dam and we looked at it together, suddenly with the lens of each one, a whole different reality, a shared reality emerged. Right? Because the engineer who had built this dam, Victoria Dam in Sri Lanka, 25 years ago, was convinced that it was the greatest example of human ingenuity for the country, for the benefit of the people. When we walked a kilometer round and found the people that had been resettled forcibly 25 years ago in the shadow of that dam wall without electricity 25 years later, although this was a hydropower dam, right? Generating electricity, the engineer's eyes were open to why, some people look at dams as an expression of social evil. And engineers look at it as the greatest expression of human ingenuity, the very same structure. And I think the United Nations is, in a sense, a platform for having precisely that effect, that you bring people together and you can get an American to understand what is driving X, Y, and Z, but you can also get a person from, South Africa or Eastern Europe to understand what is it that an American sees in terms of a certain reality, or a European.